How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Soul Ward. I'm Bryce Newberger, and I hope everyone had a Merry Christmas and is looking forward to a Happy New Year. My number one Christmas gift from my wife, she pleasantly surprised me, was my systematic philosophical theology book by William Lane Craig. This is volume 1, though I look forward to grabbing all the other volumes as I finish this one and as they release. I believe 2A is out. I think 2B is still being written or might be out. Either way, I'm on volume 1. I've added this to my morning reading plan. I love systematics. I picked up Wayne Grudem's Systematic Theology for fun when I was 19. And I was like, like a systematic way of thinking through theology. I love this. And then now I don't really like Reformed theology at all. So I was very happy to see a systematic that wasn't Reformed and philosophical, which is something that I think is missing from theology. So I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up in a Christian private school, and then I went to seminary. So I've spent a lot of time in Christian thought. In fact, actually, the first few years I got to seminary were kind of boring for me as a young student because the first classes were introductions to the Old Testament, things that I had grown up learning in elementary school, in middle school, in a classical in a class format. But what I want to do is Dr. Craig has written this book, and he has definitely focused on academic rigor and being very specific with his arguments. He's very wordy, but I feel like he's chosen his words. I believe he's chosen his words very specifically. However, with specificity and with intention, sometimes we lose accessibility. And so this book, just reading through the introduction, was very, very dense. And as someone who has grown up in theological circles, not philosophical circles, which is fascinating that he writes in his introduction that problem, right? He kind of hands me that problem. It's a problem he struggled with, that he says he's not a master of theology. He's not a expert theologian. He's an expert philosopher. But he's a philosopher who cares deeply for theology. And so that's where this book comes from. And he said there's really not been too many philosophic systematic theologies before. I think he cites Plantinga, but beyond that, and he said even them, they didn't have the benefit of the modern revolution that we've had in philosophy. So they're missing out on the last few, decade to decades of advancement in Christian philosophical thought. So this book is very rigorous. He cites classical philosophical arguments that me, as a theologian, am only tangentially aware of. And so when he references, something like divine simplicity, and he doesn't spell it out, this is something that, as a theologian, I'm aware of, but it's also more on the philosophy side. And so, and he's attacking it from a philosophical angle, kind of refuting it, which made a lot of sense to me, because I think that's where a reformed systematic theology falls apart, is in things like divine simplicity. To help my audience, though, I want to make this book accessible. I want to encourage everyone to buy this book. This book is $60. I got it on sale. My wife got it on sale for me at like $35. So when she saw that, she's like, that's a steal. Let me get this Christmas present for him. I can't always afford these big, long books. I've inherited some great ones that I'm so blessed to have. I've got a few different volumes on systematics. A lot of them are Reformed dogmatics, and again, I'm not a big fan of Reformed theology. But I'm a big fan of Reformed thinkers. But either way, I want to encourage you guys to grab this book. I want to grab each volume as it comes out and just kind of make the investment piece by piece to grab it, make it a little bit more accessible for me. And then I want to go through it, and I want to encourage you guys to go through it. And I want to, maybe if it's too dense for you, you can tune into my channel and I can help break it down for you. I think the work Dr. Craig does is really important. He's definitely one of my heroes of the faith. I want to encourage people to be able to grab this thought and think through it. Just this week, I was chatting with my brother-in-law about soteriology, and he's not been to seminary. He doesn't think philosophically, but he was running into some issues on what it means to be saved. He was making the claim that if you think differently than him, like even just if you behave with orthodoxy, but you or orthopraxy, if you behave with orthopraxy, but you have the wrong orthodoxy, you believe wrong, but you act right. To the degree, not disagreeing on Christ's divinity or anything, but just like he believed you can lose your salvation with an Arminian theology, but more extreme. Like his version was, if you don't agree with Arminian theology, you are also not saved. And so, anyways, just kind of the stumbling block. And as I was walking him through some logical thinking, some textual criticism, right, helping him try to push back against some of this extreme thought that he had. This is the kind of stuff that lay Christians need. And I want them to engage with it. So I want to encourage you to go on this journey with me. The book is largely accessible until he gets to certain points where we just need to unpack some of those. But so first, I'll explain divine simplicity for people like my brother-in-law, people like my parents, people like my friends from church who tune into this channel. It's funny because I just made a video on Jehovah's Witnesses that's going to get like 3,000 views. I'm not doing this to be popular. If I was, I would just keep hammering that Jehovah's Witness train. But I'm here to create videos that I think are necessary. So this one's going to take a hit on viewership, but it's okay. So let me explain divine simplicity for those who need, who are going to encounter this and not know what he means by divine simplicity. So divine simplicity is basically the theological doctrine that God is utterly without parts. So we'll say this a lot at church: God is love, right? So the Bible said the God of all love, but we'll say God is love. So it's to say God's without parts, composition, or complexity. He isn't a collection of attributes like goodness, power, and love, but he is those attributes. So God is love. God is power, right? God is meaning. Meaning God's essence, existence, and attributes are identical and indivisible, making him perfectly unified, immutable, and transcendent. So this concept goes all the way back to Anselm, Augustine, Aquinas. It distinguishes the infinite creator from finite composite creatures, asserting that God doesn't have qualities but is pure being, pure goodness. And Plantinga, Dr. Craig, they reject this concept of divine simplicity because it makes God hard to approach and hard to understand. And when you begin to think through logical thought process and textual criticism, okay, how do we take what Scripture says and think through, what was the intent, what does it mean, and what is it saying to us, and how do we live it out? The last step of exegesis is application. You haven't really read your Bible until you've applied it, right? James would say anyone who reads the word and forgets it, doesn't do it, right, is like someone who looks in the mirror and instantly forgets their own reflection. If you look and you've got, some smudge on your face and you walk away and don't clean the smudge on your face, you might as well have not looked in the mirror, right? So the last step of exegesis, of understanding your Bible, is to apply it to your life. And so that's why something like divine simplicity needs to kind of be refuted to a degree, because we need to make sure that our faith is livable and that God remains approachable. He'll get into more specifics as that goes, but I just want to introduce that concept for the reader, so when they approach divine simplicity, they know what it means. It means that basically God has no parts. God is all of his parts unified because he has no parts. So God is power. God is love. God is goodness. And this gets said a lot in sermons by pastors and people in the lay church. God is love. And so, just keep that in your mind. And now you know what that means when you come across it in the book. The next one is in his introduction, Dr. Craig refutes two. That's kind of refuted just outright, but it's not really focused on. He's like, such thoughts have infiltrated Christian thought, like this one, which makes no logical sense, and then he moves on. But there's two that he spends a little bit more time refuting and says will come into heavy play in his book. Okay, and when I talk about this book not being approachable, right? Let me read this to you. Here we go. My first rejection First is my rejection of meta-ontological thesis of Quinian provenance, namely a criterion of ontological commitment according to which we are committed to the reality of the values of variables bound by the existential quantifier and to the reference of singular terms and sentences we take to be true. That's one sentence. I read that and I was like, what? Come again? And so I think this can be a problem for lay theologians, lay evangelists, people on the street like me, who are chatting with people at church, in life, at work. Excuse me. My coffee's not sitting well with me today. We need to make sure that we can think through these big, heady thoughts and that we have the language to kind of, enter the ring with this kind of thought. But then we need to break it down and make it approachable and applicable for other people. So if I'm thinking a thought that I struggle to, and I like to use my kids as an example. If I can't explain a thought to my kids, then I might not fully understand it. My kids are capable of, I've got a 13-year-old at the oldest, but even my 11-year-old surprises me with some of the concepts that these guys can grasp. And I've been a youth pastor and people have been like, wow, the students have really just bloomed in theological knowledge when you came on board. And I was like, well, I stopped babying them. Right. Teenagers, the secret, if you want to be a good youth pastor, the secret is don't baby your youth group. Give them the hard stuff. They'll love it and they'll appreciate you for it. Okay. So let's talk about his first rejection of, Quine's meta-ontological criterion. Okay, so let's explain simply what this is, which is basically if a true theory talks about something like numbers or abstract objects, then that thing must exist. So for example, if I'm going to make a true statement to you and that true statement involves numbers, then in order for my statement to be true, the numbers I'm using must also be true. So this is called the indispensability argument, right? So for math and abstract objects. And so, for example, I can't make certain points to you. I can't say there are two things you must know, right? If two doesn't exist, right? So it's indispensable that two, as an abstract concept, the number two must exist. And so Craig does something pretty surprising here, I think, for a lot of people, which is he rejects this point. He's rejecting this meta-ontological criterion, the indispensability argument for this. So what he'll explain, and I like it, and as I kind of break things down again, he was very specific in his language. As I attempt to communicate it to people who are going to struggle to grasp with that kind of language, I will sacrifice some of his specificity, and so with that, we might lose some definition. So please feel free to engage with me in the comment section, and we can parse out maybe where I've overcorrected. But Craig's move is going to say like logic, math, and concepts are tools God can use without existing independently. So he's trying to preserve God's freedom. God isn't constrained by abstract objects. And so people will ask questions like, can God make a rock he can't lift, right? Can God defy logic? If God can't defy logic, then he's bound by logic, and therefore logic is superior to God in a metaphysical hierarchy. So in a beyond physics hierarchy, an ordering of things, you would have to say logic is higher in the order than God because God is bound by logic. So Craig flips that and says, no, God is not bound by logic. And so the way that I would say is like if I paint a picture of Jesus to kind of give my kids an example of what Jesus would have looked like in Middle Eastern, time, or if someone saw Jesus back then and painted a picture of him, no one did, but that does not mean Jesus is made of paint, right? So we're using a medium to describe God. So with art, that's pretty easy to grasp, right? I paint a picture of something. If I paint a picture of myself, I'm not made of paint, right? But with God, it's the same way. When we are using logic, when we're using argument, when we're using math, when we're using these things to explain God, these are mediums we're working with. They are not God. And so you can use logic and math to reason about God, or the world without accidentally worshiping numbers and propositions. And that's a problem because, again, I love Dr. Peterson. I've got his book, Maps of Meanings, which I think is over there because I've been reading it. And one thing Dr. Peterson gets wrong, and I'm just going to say this, is he kind of worships these archetypal metaphysical hierarchies where he says God is that which determines which way is up within a hierarchy, right? So if something's better than something else, why is it better? When you really get down to the brass tacks and you get beyond just preference and you get into like literal, logical, it's better than this, why is it better? He would say God is the one who determined what is better and what is worse. God determines which way is up in a hierarchy, and he rests at the top of that hierarchy. Dr. Craig removes God from the hierarchy and says, yeah, God can determine which way is up in a hierarchy, but he's also outside of the hierarchy. So I think this is pretty freeing because that means God can be completely sovereign, personal, and free without being boxed in by abstract rules. And that is honestly goes back to the divine simplicity. That was his issue with divine simplicity. It makes God unapproachable. It also reduces God to things like power and love and goodness, which are all true. But when we look at God and we would say God is perfect love and God is perfect justice, and that is when we get to the problem of evil arguments, or divine hiddenness, we get to some of these arguments. How can we reconcile them? Because if God is love, then how can he also be justice? So that's why it's important to see God as a being, right? A spiritual being, a metaphysical being, but a being nonetheless. And us created in the image of God, bearing being, right? We are created in his image. So God is much like us. We are much like God in that we are created in the Imago Dei and we bear aspects of God. We're not advocating for Mormonism where you can become God and God is just a man. That is not what I'm saying. Okay, the next one is kind of fun. I'm a huge time nerd. I think some of the reasons why I have been able to dance in certain arenas of logical thought is because I'm a time nerd. That picture up there, the white one, you can't really see it, but that is the Flash. One of my youth students drew it for me. I've also got the Flash stuffy over there, and my son created me for Christmas. My son didn't have any money to spend, and so he made me a little Flash pipe cleaner guy, which is pretty cool. The Flash is a great superhero because he plays with time, and his number one enemy is Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash, who also messes with time. And so Eobard Thawne is a time paradox. So I've as a young adult, as a kid, I got to play around with these concepts of time and messing with time. Time's very important to the Bible, and so I want to encourage everyone to be more free thinking with how we approach time. A lot of people's issues with certain knots that they can't untie within theology go back to how they treat time. So Dr. Craig writes that he adheres to a tensed theory of time and that he sees God also as omnitemporal. This is a really interesting move because there's two theories of time. There's A theory of time and B theory of time. And I've referenced them before in videos. I was like, well, that's A theory of time, B theory of time. That's a video for another day. This is not going to be a whole video on A theory of time, B theory of time. But it will play into his book. And so we might have a video in the future just fully dedicated to A theory, B theory. But A theory is that the present is real and the future is open. The past is fixed and the future is contingent. So what that means is now is happening now. The past already happened and the future hasn't happened yet. So that's a tensed, like past tense, future tense. That's a tensed theory of time. That's A theory of time. B theory of time is a tenseless form of time. So yes, the past happened, but it's happening now. The present's happening now, and the future's happening right now. So a good way, if you go watch the show Loki, specifically, or just season 1 and season 2 are really good. Season 2, I think, gets more into this. It's a good example of how time a B theory of time works. A B theory of time, and a lot of theologians explain God as B theory of time. God sits outside of time, and he watches the timeline like a parade. He can see the beginning of the parade, he can see the middle of the parade, and he can see the end of the parade. If you were up in New York, Tower, watching the Macy's Day Parade or whatever, and you're looking down, you would see the whole parade happening. And they would explain that's how God sees time. So the future's happening now. So when God makes a prophecy, God is explaining what's happening in the future. A theory of time, the tensed theory of time, would say the future's not happening. I just bit my lip. The future's not happening, but God is just so omniscient that he knows what's going to happen, even though it doesn't exist. And so that actually, again, gets into some interesting questions with the Trinity and Jesus not knowing the time when he's on earth. Jesus says, no one knows the time but my Father. And so you can begin to unravel certain things there. Dr. Craig doesn't get into that now. That's just me free thinking. But so having an A theory of time, but having God exist omnitemporally, means that God exists at all times simultaneously, but also interacts in real time. And this is where we get to like this Doctor Who wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff. God knows the future, but doesn't force it. Human choices are genuinely free. So we would say God doesn't know the future, or I would say the future doesn't exist. I kind of said something heretical there on accident. The future doesn't exist yet. It hasn't happened yet, but God also exists in the future. And so it's a little bit of a paradox. Again, studying characters like Eobard Thawne in the comics could be a very fascinating character study for such a thing like this. Excuse me again for coughing. Why it matters is that events like the crucifixion are contingent yet fully within God's knowledge. So when God prophesied the crucifixion, he knew it would happen, but he can make contingencies based upon it. So, for example, after Christ dies, we have categorized faith. We have those who are in Christ and those who are in darkness. And this, again, came up with my brother-in-law as we were talking about soteriology and how did he understand the effect of sin? How did he understand the effects of regeneration and sanctification and all of these things? So time plays an important piece because how is Jesus applying our salvation based on the cross? How did that all work out? So Dr. Craig, again, just kind of points this out, but he doesn't get into the weeds yet. He says as we get more into the volume 1, 2, 3, right, 5, we'll get more into the minutia of how this plays out. So it's just important to mention this now. So I think that this is, actually is an important book to read. I think just pointing out these three things to you, divine simplicity, the Quine's meta-ontological criterion, and the A theory of time, and how God can be omnitemporal. If I just point out these three things, you can read the whole prologue of this book, and it can be very accessible just with those three touches. I encourage you to do so. I am not going to go chapter by chapter because the chapters are huge, and I think it would be too much to cover. But what I'm currently in is I'm in the of chapter 1, prolegomena, which is prolegomena. I'm on the first chapter. It's dense. I just want to leave this video here today. I will point out that so far, he has given me mostly a history of theology and philosophy and the verification principle. And I think the verification principle is, he does explain that, which I think is really cool. So he made that more accessible. So in the verification principle is basically a sentence, in order to be meaningful, must be capable in principle of being empirically verified. So this is naturalism, materialistic naturalism, to a degree. It's actually more of a positivism, which means if I say something, you have to be able to prove empirically that what I said is correct. Now, of course, this collapses in on itself because you can't empirically verify the true statement that I just said. So I can't affirm my own statement is true to prove its truth because it rejects itself. But he does explain that in the first chapter. And so it's a little bit more accessible there. I think it's a fascinating study on the history of philosophy in Anglo-America. I'm going to read this every morning. I really love this book. I'll try to drop a video, hopefully once a week, on this to make this book accessible. I want to encourage you guys. It's $35 right now on Amazon. If the special's still up, this is before the new year. Please, please, please go grab this book. Wrestle with this book. Read this book. This book can be approachable. If you read ahead of me or I haven't dropped a video yet on something and you really want to know while you're reading it, or you don't want to wait for me, Google it, look it up, right? Use whatever tools you can find to just explain certain principles. Go watch. There's YouTube is filled with videos on philosophers breaking down crash courses in philosophy on just the concepts. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to know the concept and then continue reading. But I hope you guys will join me for this journey. It's been very rewarding for me already. I'm a huge nerd for this stuff, so maybe I'll be alone here. But yeah, join me. Buy this book. God bless you guys, and I hope you have a happy new year. Bye.